Welcome back, everybody. It is time. Yes, it's your favorite time of the week. It's time for Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey Sports original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders. Lots to talk about with the Raiders, of course. Since we last talked to you, they have a coach. Yes, Mr. Peter Carroll, the 73-year-old dynamo, comes in, joins John Spytek, who's the new GM. We're going to get all into that. You guys have been reading about it. You know, with the interviews Pete Carroll's been doing all over the country. We're going to do that and talk about that. By the way, our video, if you're watching us on video, brought to you by our good friends at BetUS. And don't forget, yes, Super Bowl's right around the corner, but you got college basketball, you got NBA. If you're into the NBA, I'm not, but hey, you might be. You can make some money there. You can get a special sign-up bonus from our friends at BetUS, 150% sign-up bonus, up to $2,000 using the promo code YouTube150. That's YouTube150 from BetUS. They bring you our video, so make sure you do that. Skockle Branson with my partner, Mr. Mo Moten. Mo is the senior NFL writer at Bleacher Report. He also hosts Bleacher Report Live Raider Show. You can catch Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. So make sure you do that. We got you covered. He's got you covered. You want to talk about Raiders every day of the week, you can do that. Follow him on x.com at Mo Moten, M-O-E-M-O-T-O-N. I am at LV Gully, and the show is SNB Today. Mo, here we are. It's one of those things, and I heard somebody say this with Pete Carroll. Some people were not excited when Pete Carroll's name came up early in this conversation. Our position here on the show has always been, hey, he might not be plan A right from the get-go under Tom Brady and Mark Davis and now John Spytek, but if it happened to be Pete Carroll, you could say, oh, that's not bad. That's a pretty good end point, especially with the coaches in the division, Jim Harbaugh, Andy Reid, and Sean Payton, 2 Super Bowl champions, a national champion in college, and Jim Harbaugh also been to a couple Super Bowls. And so Pete Carroll fits in that group. He's got that gravitas. But the old statement of, hey, sometimes you don't, it's a Rolling Stone song. So I'm gonna refer to my music knowledge here, right? You don't always get what you want, but you get what you need sometimes. And Mo, I'm kind of buoyed by the fact I see a lot of people in Raider Nation who might have wanted the Ben Johnsons, the Todd Monkins of the world, who are very excited, especially after. And press conferences are press conferences. They don't really mean all that much in the end of the day, but everybody seems pretty energized. I know you've seen this on your show as well. Tell me what you're feeling about Pete Carroll and the fact that he's now in Las Vegas. He is now leading the Silver and Black on the field.
Right. So I've always been in the camp that the Pete Carroll hire would be a quality hire, assuming he's the best candidate on their list. Now, remember, Pete Carroll was hired, I believe, last Friday. And as I pointed out, Todd Monken was the only other offensive coach on their interview list. So what that told me is that offensive-minded, young, hotshot offensive coordinators just weren't interested in the job. And it's obvious why. Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, Carter Bradley. So they went with the best option available to them. Remember, Todd Monken never set up an interview date with the Raiders. He signed an extension, a new contract with the Baltimore Ravens. So understanding what their talent, what their candidate pool was, again, they went with the best candidate. And if you're going to go with the best candidate who's a defensive coach, Pete Carroll is at the top of the list. You look at his resume, he's been coaching for over 5 decades. One of 3 coaches to win a natty on the college level and a Super Bowl title. So he's distinguished. You put him in that division, the AFC West, he doesn't shrink. The one thing that did stick out to me, though, Scott, is the press conference. He went directly at the issues, that are facing the Raiders. Talked directly to Max Crosby, as did John Spytek, because we all know Max Crosby wants a new deal, wants to win right away. He said, we're going to turn this thing around. We're going to find you, Max Crosby, and we're going to get this thing together. The other thing is talk directly about the quarterback position, which is the elephant in the room, which is why the Raiders had a limited interview list when it came to hiring head coaches in the first place. So he understands there was a lot of self-awareness there, talked about his age, talked about the quarterback situation, talked directly to Max Crosby. I think that's exactly what the Raiders need at this point in the franchise's trying to get back to prominence.
Yeah, and I like this too because, and again, this is not a slight, and you know how I felt. I thought the uphill battle with Antonio Pierce was just that from the very beginning because of his lack of experience, and this is not a shot at Antonio Pierce, but the difference, and again, you would expect it. It's not a negative against Antonio Pierce. It just is what it is. Pete Carroll's been there, done that. He's polished, and he's also done this before when he got to Seattle, and we saw he had those first two rough seasons as he turned things around, and then his worst season after that was at the end of his time in Seattle when they were 9-8, right? So it wasn't like they went from this Super Bowl quality team to being a 3-4 win team, and so I like the fact that what he brings them is this stability, and he is not. And this is the thing. I want to make this clear because I've seen people say this, Mo, and I want to get your comments. He is not a retread. Retread implies that a coach kind of wore out and the times passed him by and he couldn't do it anymore. Now, the end of at his time in Seattle, yes, there was some struggles there. It was roster, it was all sorts of things, and sometimes there's just a natural end to a situation. I think that was the situation with Pete Carroll, but he is energized, and everybody, 73 years old. Let me tell you, I'm serious. If you met Pete Carroll on the street, I might think he's in his early 60s, right? And that means something. You mentioned Max Crosby, who absolutely needs a new contract, no question about it. But Max Crosby immediately after meeting him, after the first interview after meeting him, what did he talk about? He talked about the energy. And you know what? That energy, and this is not energy yelling Raiders and smoking cigars in locker rooms. This is energy that is inspiring, that is motivational. And so if you're a guy like Max Crosby who's been through the ringer with this franchise, okay, and the other guys on the roster too, frankly, Mo, you see this man who comes in and he is a dynamo. And it's sort of like, hey, everybody, get on my back and let's go. We don't have time to mess around. We're not going to talk about this. We're just going to go. It's about winning. It's about putting together the squad we need to be competitive in this division and in this conference. And you got to like the way this has started. You got to like also the fact that he's got the young GM there who he can work with and also teach a few things.
Right. So this is a non-football type of viewpoint, Scott, and you know this, right? There are some people out there are the same age as you, but they look way older than you. So you could be for Pete Carroll, like he could be 73 years old, but as you said, you would think he's in his 60s, uh, based on his energy, what players are saying about him when they're around him. So again, the biological age is 73, going on 74 in September. Understandable concern for some people because they, after 5 years, probably not going to be around because Father Time catches up with us all. But he could still do the job and handle the rigors of being a head coach and do it at a high level. Now he has to figure out the quarterback position. That's going to pretty much dictate how quickly things get turned around. But I said this last night, Scott, on Wednesday night when I listened to Pete Carroll again, because I listened to the press conference over again. I'm like you, I'm not a press conference guy. I'm not a guy who falls in love with the press conference because you prepare for that, right? But when Pete Carroll says, excuse me, that he's going to turn things around, it sounds different coming from a person who's done it before in multiple places. USC, Seattle Seahawks. This isn't a guy, a hotshot coordinator saying, I'm going to come in and turn things around, but he doesn't have the track record of doing it. This is Pete Carroll. He again done it at multiple levels. So you take it in differently when someone like Pete Carroll says something like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And so I look at this and I just think to myself, okay, so all the sexy names out there with these young coaches, and of course, we saw Liam Cohen, your guy, who now has gone to the bottom of the list because of how he said Duval. And look, it was cringy, but does that mean he can't coach football? No.
Scott, can I
So
say something?
yeah,
I'm
go
sorry
ahead.
to cut you off,
That's
but
okay. Go ahead.
there were people having fun with me on that one, and
Yeah.
I took it in that way in jest. But I find it funny that the same people who were making fun of Liam Cohen for saying Duval the way he said it,
Yeah.
he put the emphasis on the wrong part of Duval. I'm not going to say it on this show because it's a Raider show, but I find it funny that people were making fun of him and saying he's corny for doing that, but all he's doing is playing to his fan base. It is
Right.
no different than a coach going to a press conference and yelling Raiders. I'm sure Jaguars fans heard, Antonio Pearson and saying, "Oh, that he sounds stupid."
Yeah.
And Raider fans that can listen to Liam Cohen and say it sounds dumb. But if you listen to the Jaguars fans at the press conference, he did another Duval chant. They said it along with him. That's their chant. I looked at Jaguars Twitter and they loved it, Scott.
Yeah.
They didn't care how corny he sounded. Some of them were like, yeah, it needs work, but they don't care about a Duval chant. They want to know what he's going to do for Trevor Lawrence. Your team chant is not going to dictate how well or how poorly you're going to coach, because he can have the crappiest Duval chant in all time in history. But guess what? If he goes out there and leads the Jaguars to an 11-6 season, no one's going to give a crap how he says Duval or anything like that. So, I mean, people, you go on social media, people are going to have fun with it. I had an issue with the way he left Tampa Bay for Jacksonville. I think there's an issue there with being upfront as a leader in a leadership position. You have to be upfront with your intentions. I have an issue with that,
Yeah.
so to speak, the way he did it. But the whole Duval thing, I think people were just having fun with it. But I just find it funny, the double standard there, because the Raiders recently had a head coach who tried to get media members to yell Raiders, and you would say that's also cringy as well.
Yeah, and to me, everybody outside your own fan base, you tend to criticize, and I get that
Exactly.
piece of it, right?
Exactly.
Because
It's
Raider
fun. It's
Nation
all in
has,
fun.
and it's
Yeah.
all in fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's a good lesson for Liam Cohen though too, which is be yourself. That
Right.
he kind of said it, and he was playing to the audience, but he was kind of not saying it with some oomph. It was kind of like, and so yeah, it's a good
Duval.
lesson for young leaders, by the way. Just be
Yeah.
yourself. Like if
Yeah.
that's not something you would do, then don't do it. Like it's okay. They're not gonna hold it against you. But anyway, so that's that. You look at Pete Carroll though, and putting his staff together. Of course, we heard on Wednesday multiple reports that Patrick Graham looks like he's staying, that the Raiders are discussing a contract with extension with him. And I am not somebody who looks at Patrick Graham like he's on the pantheon of defensive coordinators, but I will say this. I think the stability is big. He's done a good job in Las Vegas. There's no question about that. He needs more talent, clearly. We've talked about this in the past. But I like the stability there. I also like, and we'll get to the offensive coordinator discussion in a second. But Mo, I like the opportunity here. Also, Tom McMahon, the special teams coach, is going to be back. There's some consistency there. So for some of these players who've been through this massive change over the last 4 seasons, with 3 coaches and all this jazz, it's nice, including the Max Crosbys, but there's other guys too. This is nice to have somebody in the building who's been there, who understands. And for the players on the defensive side of the ball, many of whom they have to make decisions on if they're going to sign, right? And give extensions to. There's players that are free agents over there, all that. This is a big opportunity, and I think Pete Carroll and John Spytek are making a really good choice here in getting Patrick Graham back to Las Vegas.
So a few things about retaining Patrick Graham, what it says to me. The first thing is I think it speaks out to Max Crosby. Think about
Mm-hmm.
Max Crosby's experience with coaching turnover since the Raiders drafted him in 2019. He's talked about this too. He's talked about players and coaches coming and going, and with his time with the Raiders. So not to say that they made a decision based on Max Crosby's feelings, but as I said, John Spytek and Pete Carroll both mentioned Max Crosby by name at the press conference. I don't think that was by accident. They want to keep Max Crosby happy. And I think hiring Patrick Graham goes a long way in doing that. You mentioned the other thing that I wanted to point out. Malcolm Kuntz is going to be a free agent. Nate Hobbs is going to be a free agent. Trayvon Merrick is going to be a free agent. Now, with a new defensive coordinator, none of those guys may have been back. Now it's a possibility they all may be back, or maybe 2 of the 3 may be back. I think definitely Malcolm Kuntz should be back. What he showed at the end of the 2023 season showed that he could possibly be Max Crosby's pass rushing mate. Unfortunately, he suffered a season-ending knee injury before Week 1. If the Raiders want to bring him back, I think he can pick up where he left off. We'll see what happens with Nate Hobbs. Has had some injury issues with his time with the Raiders, but when he's on the field, he's a quality playmaker in the slot. So I think having Patrick Graham, keeping Tom McMahon, some people had mixed feelings about that, but it does show that the Raiders are trying to have some continuity, some stability, even with new faces in the building.
Right, Mo. And you look at this defense, and little below middle of the road, right? So they weren't a top 10 defense. They were at the end of last season. previous season when Antonio Pierce took over as the interim. So you look at it, and if you're a GM, if you're John Spytek and you're Pete Carroll, clearly there's going to be a lot of involvement there. Pete Carroll is not the GM, but you saw in the press conference Pete Carroll asserting himself that, hey, we're going to be on the same page here. We're going to be on the same page here, which I thought was very interesting. They're going to work together, and you can't solve all the problems this roster has in one draft, one free agent class, right? You just can't do it. You can do a lot. This team can get much, much better in one offseason. There's no question about that. But that consistency and knowing that, hey, you know what? Yeah, eventually we'd like to upgrade at defensive back, and maybe they will in this draft too, but or at linebacker or in the interior of the defensive line. But you know what? We're going to focus on key areas. Obviously, quarterback being one of them, and that might even get deferred, and we'll talk about that in a second. But to me, this is, you have to put a pecking order of what are the biggest problems, what are you going to address in 25. You take a plan for the next 6 months, and then you take a plan for the next 2 years, right? And you lay that out and you say, okay, what are we going to address first? And then how are we going to address it? Draft, free agency, okay? Extensions. And then what are we going to do next year? So that's the thing. So if you see the Raiders start to solve some of these question marks, but not others, don't get frustrated, Mo, because again, you cannot solve them all in one offseason.
The one thing I will say though that Pete Carroll has to be careful about, and Pete Carroll knows what he's doing, obviously, because he's been doing this for quite some time. But as far as the fan base is concerned, when Pete Carroll talks about turning things around quickly, right? If you're going to do that, you're probably going to have to take some swings in free agency and or the draft.
Yeah.
So when a free agency comes up, I think a lot of fans are going to be expecting these big major signings. And I would say maybe, maybe not. Depends. It depends on who they keep and who they don't keep, right? So if they wind up re-signing, as I mentioned, guys like Nate Hobbs and Malcolm Kuntz, Trayvon Merrick, Robert Spillane, even Devon Diablo, if they re-sign a lot of their guys, they may not spend a whole lot in free agency. Now, if they let a lot of those guys go, then you may see one or two big swings. We saw Christian Wilkins last offseason under Tom Telesco. We'll see what John Spytek and Pete Carroll come up with. Let's remember that Pete Carroll has had some dabblings in front office personnel. So I believe him when he says that, it's going to be a collaborative with him and Spytek and probably Tom Brady when it comes to the quarterback position. But I would just say before you start to pencil in certain free agents for the Raiders, let's see who they bring back on new contracts.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that you look at how they're going to handle roster construction, and yes, some of the free agents you might bring in could be big names, and we'll get to some of those in a second too. But that doesn't mean they're going to get big money, and so you have to look at what can be done here. And so don't expect, and to your point about managing expectations, which I think is really, really keen there, is you can do some of these moves, but the draft is deep. They have to, and they went at length during these press conferences and interviews afterwards, Mo, about hitting the draft. You're not going to hit on every player, but when it comes to the Raiders in the first 3-4 rounds this season, very, very crucial draft in my view. Not just because of the quarterback, which I think they can get maybe in the 3rd and 4th round as a developmental guy. Of course, the first round is a different story, but you can address defensive positions, including the defensive line, including defensive back, including offensive line, including running back, deep running back draft, deep wide receiver draft. There's a lot of things you can do with young players here. So to your point, Mo, if they don't make some massive splash in free agency, don't get worried, because I think there's other things afoot there as well. Mo, we look at the offensive coordinator situation. Darren Bevel's name kept coming up. I was not excited about that. I'm starting to come around a little bit on it. Listen, every coach has upsides, downsides, especially if they have a record in this league. But I think the familiarity of Pete Carroll and what he wants and the offense and what they have makes sense. We just haven't heard very many other options out there. I don't see it being anybody but him. What do you think?
Yeah, I've been preparing my Bleacher Report Live audience for Darrell Bevel. I'm not the most enthusiastic about it because my theory is the mark of a good play caller is seeing that play caller offense going to go multiple places and elevate offenses. Darrell Bevel didn't do that after his Seattle years. He was an offense coordinator play caller. You can look this up in Jacksonville. and he was an offensive play call, offensive coordinator in Detroit. None of those offenses were better than 18th in scoring.
Right.
And that's my worry with Darrell Bevell is that was it magic in the bottle with Marshawn Lynch there and Russell Wilson there? Was he able to uplift talent elsewhere? And again, the answer was no for when I looked at his track record after Seattle, post Seattle. It wasn't good. Now he's the passing game coordinator, quarterbacks coach over in Miami, and the Miami Dolphins pass game is pretty good when the temperature is above 50 degrees. But you know that
And your
there's
quarterback's not
limitations.
injured.
Right, and there are limitations to that. So I prefer. I had two, and I did this Raider. I do this Raider common sense thing. I did it with Pete Carroll. I said my hope is Ben Johnson, but my Raider common sense says the Raiders are going to hire Pete Carroll. And I had a similar post on X last this week, and I said my hope is the Raiders hire Chip Kelly or Thad Lewis, but my Raider common sense says it'll be Darrell Bevell. And really quick, Scott, the reason why I like Chip Kelly is because he was, oh, Chip Kelly sucks. You remember what he did in the NFL? People have this thing, and I don't get it, Scott, that if you fail in one place, that you're just a failure for the rest of your life, that you don't ever develop, make changes or tweaks, that once you suck at one thing, you're going to suck for the rest of your life at it. So Pete Carroll, right? By the way, Pete Carroll led two Eagles teams to 10-6 seasons. Got fired after a 6-9 season with the Eagles. Then went 2-14 with the San Francisco 49ers, and that's what everyone wants to bring up. People forget he went to UCLA for like 5 years and changed his offensive outlook. UCLA was a power running football team. That Zach Charbonnet, who by the way was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks in the second round by Pete Carroll's Seahawks. So there is a connection there as far as player evaluation is concerned. And then he goes to Ohio State, and you see what their run game looks like, right, Scott? I'm sure you remember
Oh
it's a
yeah.
sore spot for you. But Chip Kelly has changed his offensive outlook since he flunked out of the NFL with the San Francisco 49ers. So I just want people to update their idea of who Chip Kelly is. A lot of players also, and I know UCLA people had an issue with the way he left UCLA for Ohio State, but a lot of players praise Chip Kelly as a bright offensive mind. The other person is Thad Lewis. The Raiders did request an interview with Thad Lewis. The reason I like Thad Lewis is because it tells me Tom Brady and John Spytek think highly of Thad Lewis because they requested an interview with him. Thad Lewis has been with that organization, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, since 2020. He was a quarterbacks coach there, so he's overlapped with Tom Brady and Spytek during his time in Tampa Bay. People like to bring up Byron Leftwich. They did not request an interview with Byron Leftwich, but they did with Thad Lewis. What does that tell you? So I would hope that if they go to a young guy, that it is Thad Lewis. But again, I think it's going to be Darrell Bevell.
Yeah, and Thad Lewis could find his way to Las Vegas under Darrell Bevell, right? Because again, you talk about coaches and succession planning, and a lot of people have talked about that with Pete Carroll because he's 73. But on the offensive side too, if Darren Bevell does come in, and you can get Thad Lewis to come over if he doesn't get the job outright, that would also be good because he could end up being someone who can ascend to that position. If Darren Bevell doesn't work out, too, you got the guy right in house, which is what we've talked about all along, which is develop talent, and Pete Carroll has done that over the years. So you're right, though. It's amazing how somebody fails somewhere and they're a failure. Now, you can go a couple places, and yes, they weren't happy with the way he left UCLA, but UCLA has been a mess for decades. So I don't blame him. He actually hung in there a lot longer than I thought he would. And what he did at Ohio State obviously has been amazing, and they won a national championship. So yeah, do that. Mo, before we get to the break, and again, we're going to get to everybody's calls, as many as we can in this show after the break. But I want to go down to some conversations around players, because one of the things that I've been warming to, and I was adamantly against it, but I can see it happening, and I wouldn't necessarily be completely disappointed in it. Everybody wants to solve the quarterback issue now. If the Raiders could get that quarterback, that forever quarterback, as I call it, that franchise quarterback, great. Some people now, we're starting to see with the East-West Shrine Bowl and now the Senior Bowl coming up this week, we're starting to see quarterbacks go up the list, as we talked about, right? Some guys are, they're a third or fourth rounder. Now you're talking about the Giants maybe taking Jackson Dart in the first round with pick number 5. So again, we don't know where the Raiders are with that position, but we look at it. The Russell Wilson question, I know a lot of Raider fans hate it. Again, I was not, I laughed it off. I'm like, okay, just because Pete Carroll's coming doesn't mean Russell Wilson. But if the Steelers decide to invest instead in Justin Fields and go that direction because Russell Wilson is a free agent. If he doesn't go back to Pittsburgh, Mo, I could see that it would be again, it's another bridge quarterback. I'm not saying it's the Russell Wilson of the MVP days. He's not close to that, but he would be the best quarterback in that room if he came to Las Vegas, even with a young quarterback, because I think they will draft a young quarterback at some point this year. But Mo, you look at that and you say to yourself, his relationship with Pete Carroll, his ability still is there. It's not, again, at the level it used to be, but there's no question that if he came to the Raiders, Mo, it wouldn't necessarily be the most exciting thing in the world, but it also wouldn't be a bad football move.
It wouldn't be a bad football move, but here's the C word again, Scott, that people get hung up on too much. Consistency, but he's also looked at as corny. Yeah. So I talked about Liam Cohen being corny with his Duval chant. Russell Wilson, let's be honest, is viewed as being a square. He's corny. He doesn't look like, or he doesn't feel like a Raider player, and that's I guarantee you that's part of it. If Russell Wilson was a little more edgy, people will have a little of different feeling about him. Now, he is limited as far as he's not going to give you 300 yards a game. That's not him. That really wasn't him in Seattle during his peak years either, even though he was a Pro Bowl player. He could still throw a beautiful deep ball. But Russell Wilson at 36 doesn't excite me. But if you're looking at what the Raiders have on their roster and you're looking at their situation, they need a bridge gap quarterback who's going to be able to steady the offense for at least maybe 1 or 2 years until they get their developmental quarterback or potential quarterback of the future. Russell Wilson can be that for a year or two. The one thing that he's going to appeal to Pete Carroll, other than their past relationship, is he doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. Right. So I like Justin Fields as a younger developmental quarterback. I do, honestly. But he does turn the ball over because he runs with the football a lot. So you have more fumbles there. Pete Carroll being a defensive-minded head coach, and a lot of defensive-minded head coaches are like this, they lose their minds with quarterbacks who turn the ball over at a high rate. As I said, Russell Wilson knows this, especially if you're going to hire Darrell Bevell. I think if the Raiders hire Darrell Bevell, I'm probably 80% sure they're going to sign Russell Wilson. But he would know the system. He protects the football. As I said, he could still throw an accurate deep ball. You saw that with Pittsburgh this past season. So while I wouldn't love the Russell Wilson signing, I would totally understand it and understand that he's going to be the bridge gap guy for 1 or 2 years while they figure out their quarterback position long term.
Right. And I think, too, you look at the situation with Aiden O'Connell. You have a solid backup there.
Right.
And then if you get a young quarterback, whether it's in the 3rd, 4th round, wherever they decide to do that, if they do, then you have the developmental guy there, too. It gives you a year to see how that guy is. And if that guy comes in, I don't care if it's Quinn Ewers or Jackson Dart. I'm not saying I like those guys. I'm just saying those are the kind of names I'm thinking of, depending on who falls where. Then you have a year to look at that player. If that player is you strike gold with that player, maybe he beats out Russell Wilson next year. During the middle of the season, we saw it. Whatever, that's fine. If he doesn't, then you have 2026 to then go maybe have an opportunity to take another quarterback. So the Raiders need to buy themselves some time to figure it out. As much as I would have liked them to solve it 2 years ago, they didn't, and they haven't. So they have to be able to do that. So I can see it happening. Again, like you, Mo, I'm not real excited about it, and I'm not saying Raider Nation should be all jazzed if Russell Wilson comes to the Raiders. But to your point, with the tight ends the Raiders have, with Brock Bowers, with Michael Mayer, with the receivers that they have in Jacoby Myers, and we'll see what they do in the draft as well, he could fit into that offense under Darren Bevell really well, if it is Bevell. And I think that would be very consistent and give the Raiders a solid foundation. Yes, they might be middle of the road on offense, but it's better than being 29th and 30th where they've been in offense. So improvement is improvement. Like I said, not going to happen in 1 year. So we'll see how it all ends up. All right, we're going to take our break. When we come back, we're going to get to your phone calls on the Raider Nation mailbag and see what you have to say about all this activity, about John Spytek, about Pete Carroll, any things about the quarterback. We'll see what you guys have to say coming up right after this. This is Silver and Black Today. Scott Branson, Mo Moten with you. Our video brought to you by our good friends at BetUS. Hey, everybody. We've been telling you all season long about BetUS and how to bet sports there. We've shown you how to bet football there, but guess what? Did you know BetUS also has a casino? For all my followers out there who love slots or live casino dealers, all the different games you want to play, BetUS has you covered there too. And not only that, we got a killer special offer for you from the great folks at BetUS. Got an amazing sign-up bonus, 200%. That's right, a 200% sign-up bonus up to $5,000 on that first deposit. Not only that, but if you want to sign up and use crypto to do so, guess what? You get a 250% sign-up bonus up to $5,000 as well. So there you go. There's so many opportunities there. Get ready for a rush with the BetUS Casino. Generous promotions and tournaments make every single time you play with them more rewarding. Spin your way to massive jackpots. And again, the 200% sign-up bonus up to $5,000 and a 250% crypto sign-up bonus up to $5,000. Again, the folks at BetUS giving you that opportunity. Make sure you take advantage of it. BetUS, where you want to play for sure. All right, welcome back to the final segment here on our Thursday edition of Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey Sports original podcast. Do us a favor, don't forget, subscribe to the show wherever you may listen to your audio. Just look for Silver and Black Today, and don't forget, rate and review. We appreciate the ratings and the reviews. We're getting comments on Spotify, all over the place, so thank you for that as well. Make sure you also follow the show on YouTube or wherever you watch your videos. We are there, YouTube, Rumble, we're on Telegram, it doesn't matter. You can find us there. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and a big thank you to the folks at BetUS. What a great season it's been with them. They sponsor the video here. Make sure you check out BetUS, get that 150% sign-up bonus using the promo code YouTube150. Skakkel Branson, Mo Moten back with you. We're going to get to your calls. Mo, we're getting so many calls. I had a couple, and I want to bring this up just because I want you guys to understand and feel good about it. I had some folks say, hey, my call didn't get on last time. We try to get as many calls as we can on, okay, in the amount of time that Mo and I have to do the show. If your call doesn't get on this week, hang in there, okay? We will get you on eventually. We appreciate the calls. I don't want you to think that we're ignoring you or not getting you on. Often I will go kind of first come, first serve, and I'll put those up. And if we don't get to the ones that came in last, I apologize. But we will get to them. And again, we'll probably even during this off season as things move along, maybe do just a mailbag show separately. I've been saying that now for a couple weeks, but I think we might have to do that, Mo, because so much going on. People have so much to say. But overall, what's the mood been when you've been doing your Bleacher Report lives on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific? What's been the overall mood? Kind of where is everybody from what you've seen?
So not to toot my own horn, but I kind of prepared my audience over there that Pete Carroll will be hired. So when Pete Carroll was hired last Friday, my audience kind of was already prepared for that. And we already went over the positives and the concerns there, obviously with age. But I would say for the most part, it's mostly positive. I think a lot of people, and this happens a lot with press conferences, after you hear the press conference, you get fired up, right? And Pete Carroll does a good job of doing that, the way he presents himself at 73 years old. So I think after the press conference, some people who were a bit on the fence got to see Pete Carroll and his energy. And I think that got them on board, and they like what they heard there. Also, the decision to retain Patrick Graham yesterday, Wednesday, was received mostly positive. Mostly positive. That was the first thing that my audience wanted me to talk about when I got on. And they were like, yeah, this means that, Max Crosby's going to be happy. This means that probably Malcolm Kuntz is going to come back. Nate Hobbs is going to come back. A lot of people think Patrick Graham could actually be the successor when Pete Carroll steps down. And they're hoping that the Raiders kind of have that chain of command there in place when Pete Carroll decides to hang him up. Now, I said, pump the brakes on that one. Let's see who his offensive coordinator is, because that person will also be in the running to be his successor once he steps down.
Yeah, and let's get the defense all the way there.
Yeah.
He needs players, but they also have to perform, and they have to get to a point where if he's really doing good, and hopefully that all aligns. Maybe he is a successor, maybe he's not, maybe he gets another job before that. You just don't know. I think Pete Carroll, is a dynamo, and I think that how far he gets with this rebuild and how far he can take the Raiders, I don't know. I'm not overly positive about it, like, oh, he's going to take him to the Super Bowl, and I'm not negative saying that he's only going to be a caretaker. I think Pete Carroll has been maligned in the past, but all the guy has done is won. So it's got to be very exciting for people out there. So we're going to hear what people have to say. Again, if you want to be a part of it, 702-900-7869. We're doing the show on Thursday mornings now. So if you want to call in, my suggestion would be to, because of the news cycle and all the changes going on, call in like Wednesday night or Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday sometime. That way you're kind of up to date on it. Because I will get some calls sometimes, and the news is, oh, hey, I don't know who we're going to get as coach. And you already know who the coach is, and so I don't want to use those calls, but that'll help your chance to get on. But again, 702-900-7869. Don't forget to follow Mo on X.com, Mo Moton, MOEEMOTON. I am at LB Gully. The show is SMB Today. All right, first we're going out to Northern California. He's Steven out in Monterey, beautiful part of the country.
Hey, Scott, Mo. This is Steven calling from Monterey, a.k.a. known as Scrubs 21 in the Bleacher Report text for Mo. Want to say thanks for everything you guys do and love tuning into the show. You guys are hilarious. Especially you, Scott, since, you were a Charger fan. But I don't hold that against you. Others would. I don't. Anyways, I just wanted to say that, I'm okay with the Pete Carroll hire. I don't really think it was, I understand people's reservations, but I thought it was fine. I thought it was a solid choice, which I know people want spectacular, but as a Raider fan, I think you should be happy with solid. My question is, what do you think would be the most underwhelming hire for OC for Pete? And also, what do you think is the best case scenario for coordinator? And same thing goes with defensive coordination. I know he's the guy that was defensive side, so he's going to have his fingerprints on there. But who do you think would be the next guy to take over on DC? Yeah, and like I said, underwhelming and overwhelming for that position as well. Thought I had another question, but I think I forgot what it was. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Thanks again for everything you guys do. I'm out.
All right, my man. Steven, thank you. Appreciate it, man. Also, obviously, we know the DC situation. Patrick Graham's pretty much done, so we'll see that he's coming in. He's going to re-sign and be part of Pete Carroll's staff. But on the OC, I think we talked about it a little bit in the last segment, Mo, which is I wouldn't be – it's not that Darren Bevel, to me, is completely underwhelming, just not really excited. I don't feel as bad about Darren Bevel as I did about Luke Getsy, right? Because Luke Getsy didn't have that level of success that Bevel had. And like you said, maybe Bevel was in the right place at the right time, and that's why he succeeded. We don't know. We'll find out. But best case scenario for OC, based on the names we've heard.
And I mentioned it, I think it's Chip Kelly. And people are going to frown upon Chip Kelly because they remember how he went out in San Francisco on the NFL level. And they're also afraid that, if Pete Carroll steps down, does that mean Chip Kelly's going to be the successor? And that isn't necessarily true with Patrick Graham being there and Patrick Graham having an existing rapport with those players. It could be Patrick Graham. I would say Chip Kelly. And again, it's for the fact that the Raiders don't have a stable quarterback position right now. They don't know who their quarterback of the future is. So this is a team that's probably going to run the ball a lot. Go look at Chip Kelly's UCLA teams. They ran the ball. That was a staple in his offense. Look at Ohio State this past season when he got there. Henderson and Judkins, right? Dynamic duo in the backfield. I think the Raiders could actually get Judkins on day 2 of the draft, and I would take him and plug him into that Raiders offense. It would go almost seamlessly if they were to hire Chip Kelly and they do have their eye on him. So I honestly like Chip Kelly because I think he fits. Even with Pete Carroll's Seattle Seahawks teams, they ran the ball effectively. I think bringing in Chip Kelly would coincide with that. Also, I brought up Thad Lewis. The reason being that comes from Tampa Bay. So Spytek and Tom Brady are familiar with him. So if they think highly of him, I would trust those guys because they've been around Thad Lewis. Now, if you look at Baker Mayfield, you may say, well, Thad Lewis is just a quarterback's coach. But Baker Mayfield has had a different coordinator every year in Tampa Bay now. Went from Dave Canales to Liam Cohen, who just left. Who's been the constant there working with him 2 years in Tampa Bay? It's been Thad Lewis. So that's why I like Thad Lewis as a young coordinator. Chip Kelly is an experienced offense coordinator. I will say, Scott, really quick, the most underwhelming hire at OC wouldn't be Bevel for me. It would be Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen's been brought up. If they hire Greg Olsen to be the offensive coordinator, Greg Olsen was the quarterback's coach under Pete Carroll in Seattle in 2023. I'd be like, what are you doing? I understand he took over for Gruden in 2021, helped get the Raiders to the playoffs, but Greg Olsen is that uncle that you love him. He's great in short periods, but you don't want him taking care of your kids for a long period of time. You don't want him controlling anything. Great in short periods.
Perfectly put. And I think Chip Kelly, I think he's leveraging the interest from the NFL to get some more money at Ohio State. Everything that I've heard here, obviously being in Ohio State's backyard, is that he's very happy there. He likes that role. But I agree with you. The one thing, too, that I'll say about Chip Kelly, if you look at Will Howard at Ohio State, who I think is going to be a dark horse in the draft, by the way, look how he developed under Chip Kelly, too. So you talked about Thad Lewis and what he's done with Baker Mayfield. I think you look at that too. And Chip Kelly, you should be excited about it because I think he's got the opportunity and he could develop a young quarterback. We'll see. Maybe he has a change of heart and he wants to go back to the pros and work for Pete Carroll and work with Tom Brady. We'll see. But thanks for the call. I appreciate it, Stephen. All right. Now we're going to our resident comedian, AJ DeMella, who's been a longtime listener to the story. He's calling us from Austin. I assume he's down there. Austin has a massive comedy circuit down there, big comedy clubs, including one owned by Joe Rogan. So we'll see what AJ has to say.
Hey, this is AJ DeMello in Austin, Texas. Hey, look at this, everybody. We got a head coach. Can you believe it? We don't have to, talk ourselves into it. But there was this, but what a cigar, or whatever. I don't know. It's funny. As soon as Pete Carroll was introduced as head coach, I just had this image of as a Raiders fan going up to Pete Carroll and giving him a hug and asking him, on behalf of Raider Nation, can we call you Dad? We need a father figure so badly right now. And I think it's even better that we didn't get a Harbaugh because I was so mad about that search last year. I was so upset. I did not watch a lot of the games in the second half of the year, being more productive doing something else. But I'm excited. I'm legitimately excited. The way Pete Carroll's going to bring it, I can't wait. The Raiders are adulting, folks. Thanks, Tom Brady. Let's reverse that bad stuff you did to us way back when. Let's push it forward. Let's go Raiders, huh? Let's go.
All right, there's AJ. Thanks for the call, man. We appreciate it, from Austin, Texas. Mo, question for you. He brings up that kind of feeling, and it is good. It's good for Raider Nation. But if you and I could fast forward, get in that time machine, get in that DeLorean and go 88 miles an hour, in 3 years, what is a successful Pete Carroll head coaching job? If he decides at 76 it's time to hang it up, what will be considered success for Pete Carroll as the head coach of the Raiders?
The Raiders are a playoff contender, number one, first and foremost. Two, that he set up a coaching staff that can sustain the success or progress that the Raiders have had under him in those 3 years, whoever that successor is going to be at head coach. And three, there is less turnover. Unless, someone leaves for a promotion. And by turnover, I mean, players not getting second contracts because they haven't performed up to their draft expectations, coaches getting fired because of underperforming position groups. So I look at it, playoff contender, succession plan looks like it's well in place, and less turnover, more stability. For me, that's what a successful Pete Carroll stint looks like. I know some people are going to say, obviously, Super Bowl, but I'm not thinking Super Bowl right now. This team has to, first of all, get back on track, has to fill some holes. So I'm looking at progress and just getting into the playoff mix because that's the first step in their progress. Now, if they win a Super Bowl in 3 years, great. But, only one team wins the Super Bowl every year, right? So it's hard. You can have a great, we just watched the Minnesota Vikings go 14-3 and go one and done in the playoffs, right? But I still think their season was a success based on the expectations. So what I'm saying is I would hope that the Raiders in 3 years are once again in the playoff mix in that tough division.
There you go. All right. We got a lot of calls to get to, so we're moving on. Ryan in the Central Valley, California, in Clovis. Here is Ryan.
Hey, guys. It's Ryan from Clovis. right now, Pete Carroll was hired about 2 hours ago. Right, and I'm listening to your show from Thursday, and so I know it's hard to keep up to date on this stuff because news is just happening quickly. I got to say, I appreciate the process. I agree. I'm like a process person in the work I do, and last few years last few hires, it's just kind of been backwards. This one, I appreciate that they took a swing for Ben Johnson. Right, it didn't work out, but hey, they're like, we're clearing everything out. You want to come in? We're making this job as attractive as possible. It took a swing. No shame in that. He went somewhere else, but I get that he went somewhere else, right? They got the quarterback, we don't. So, but now we ended up with Pete Carroll. I'm a USC guy. I remember when he came to SC, people were like, I don't know about this guy. He didn't do too well in the NFL. And now he's a legend in the SC community, and I don't care what people say. He won 2 championships there. And so now we turn towards coordinators, and I'm sure we might have something by the time your guys' next show comes on. So that'd be great. And then QBs, I don't really know who would be the coordinators, but QBs, it seems like both Spytek and Brady have some relationship with Kyle Trask, who's now going to be a free agent, so that might be interesting. Take a flyer on, not necessarily come in as a starter, but just, hey, come in and compete. Do well, you can be a starter. Russell Wilson's probably back on the board since he and Pete are reconciled. Maybe the Steelers keep him, who knows. So anyway, things are happening quickly. I am kind of, again, I like the Lions. No, nothing against them. They've been showing us that it can be done. I'm kind of glad they lost so we can get this thing rolling. Ben Johnson kind of unclogged or pulled the stopper from what's going to be happening with him. And so we could get our staff in place. So anyway, I'm actually excited by the Carroll hire. I know he's old. But the dude's got more energy than I do. I'm 30 years younger than he is. So anyway, appreciate what you do. Talk to you soon. Go Raiders.
All right, there you go. Ryan and Clovis. And they talk about age, Mo. And people look at the negatives of age. They don't look at the positives. Not only as he mentioned, 2 national championships at USC, the Super Bowl championship at Seattle, but the experience, the knowledge, the ability to relate to players, the way players, you saw Marshawn Lynch there at the press conference, of course, yelling Raiders, but you saw the relationships he has with people. And not every player loves their coach, but you've seen Richard Sherman talk about he will get it done in Las Vegas. I have no doubts. So the positives of somebody being older, having been through all these experiences, is something you can't ignore.
Yeah, what I don't get is it seems like as you age, people diminish the accomplishments that you've had.
That's interesting.
Right. So I never understood that. Like, your accomplishments are your accomplishments. And it's not like Pete Carroll did these things 20 years ago. He was a head coach in 2023. Right. As you said, his bottom out was 9-8. If the Raiders had been 9-8 this year, that they were been in the playoff run late in the season. So the fact that his bottom out was 9-8, I think speaks to his coaching acumen and what he's able to do with his football teams, even over the course of a decade plus. So think about this. It is hard to hold the locker room with your voice, for over 5 years. Players start to tune you out. The fact that he was with the Seahawks for over a decade, 13, 14 years, again, says a lot about his stronghold on the locker room. I think part of it is he lets players be themselves. And this is where I think AP has similarities to Pete Carroll, where Pete Carroll can carry over that mentality of, we're going to let players be themselves. He's talked about that during his time in Seattle, and I think that's going to play well in the locker room. The other thing I want to bring up, Scott, the Kyle Trask mention. I brought up Kyle Trask in my Bleacher Report Live, and people were like, who is this guy? And it's pretty cool that the caller brought him up because, and I'm sorry I forgot the name of the caller, but cool that the caller brought him up because I went through the history of Kyle Trask, and while I don't love Kyle Trask as a starter, not very mobile, about 6'5", 236, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted him as the last pick in the 2nd round. He wasn't like a 6th round flyer. He was a 2nd round pick at a time when Brady was in his mid-40s and Blaine Gabbert was on the roster. So they felt like Kyle Trask had a chance to be the heir to Tom Brady. But when they signed Baker Mayfield, he completely took off. He beat Kyle Trask in the quarterback battle, and he's run away with that job. So I do see Kyle Trask being on the Raiders' radar, not as a starter type guy, but as another developmental quarterback.
Yeah. And to your point about accomplishments, Pete Carroll's the 15th all-time winningest coach in NFL history. Just to put that in perspective. I mean, that's not a small accomplishment, Mo. You're putting wins on the board, right? And you're talking top 15. Think about how many head coaches there's been. So great point.
And also, Scott, 13 winning seasons and took 12 teams to the playoffs in 18 years as a head coach. Think about the percentage of that.
Amazing. All right, there you go. All right, now we're moving on to Austin in San Diego.
Hey, Scott, Mo. This is Austin from San Diego, just calling again because looks like things have finally a pen has been put to paper, so to speak. But I've been mulling over the idea as far as John Spytek and Pete Carroll, and after giving it further thought, I think that this is actually the perfect marriage. I think we wanted collectively a partnership of two people that have experience with both of them coming from winning organizations previously. Spytek winning a Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos and also with Tampa Bay. He's made decisive moves in free agency and in the draft, constantly trading up and down to get his guys or the organization's guys. And so has Pete Carroll. They've identified their type of players. And Pete Carroll, I mean, he won early in Seattle without a quarterback. I forget who it was. It was Tavares Jackson, I think that was his name. And he was able to build a organizational football team from the ground up through the draft and through, free agency as well. But he also wasn't afraid to step away from big contracts if he saw that there was someone that was more talented on the roster. And I think with Spytek and Carroll now working in lockstep, we have a clear vision for the football team. I'm excited to see where we go in the draft now. Obviously, I think that quarterback is no longer a huge priority because he's won in the past without it. I could see him addressing that in the later rounds, especially with that being kind of a weak position group here. I'm excited to see where it goes. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on just them working together and the importance of being decisive with decision making. Thanks again.
All right, there you go. And listen, I think the quarterback position is still a priority. I understand, and I know that the narrative now is that, well, he's won without it in the past. And I mean, he bottled lightning when he found Russell Wilson later in the draft. And could he do it again? Perhaps. The chances of hitting that well, I just don't have a lot of confidence in that. We'll see, though. It could happen. But at the same time, I think those guys working together in concert, too, with Tom Brady, don't forget, I think he's right. I think, we talked last year when Antonio Pierce got the job about his vision. And his vision, if you remember, the one thing I was mostly critical about, Mo, was the vision was a lot of talk, but not a lot of what exactly does that mean. And there wasn't a lot of deep probing questions about that either to say, well, you're saying you're going to be physical, you're going to do this. What does that mean? And we never really got the answer, and we saw how it ended up. With Pete Carroll, John Spytek, Tom Brady, I get the sense because we have a track record to go off, obviously, with Carroll. We know what Spytek did in Tampa. And so that plan and what they told us initially, to me, Mo, carries a lot more water.
So quick history lesson. When Pete Carroll got to Seattle, he had Matt Hasselbeck, 35-year-old quarterback. Matt Hasselbeck obviously passed his prime at that age, but Matt Hasselbeck had played in big games. If you remember, that was the year that the Seattle Seahawks won a division with a 7-9 record, but then beat the Saints with that beast mode Marshawn Lynch run. You remember that beast mode run where he's throwing off 8 guys on his way to the end zone? That was that year. So that was a 7-9 Seahawks team that everyone said, oh, they just won a bad division. They wound up winning a playoff game. And then he had the late Tavares Jackson. Tavares Jackson passed away in 2020, unfortunately. But if you remember Tavares Jackson, he was a second-round pick from the Minnesota Vikings, 64th overall. Mobile quarterback. He started, I believe, 15 games for the Seattle Seahawks after the Matt Hasselbeck year. So while he had quarterbacks who he had to kind of not find, but quarterbacks who weren't, high-end starters, I'm like you, Scott. I do think that the quarterback position is still a priority because after those 2 years with Matt Hasselbeck and the late Tavares Jackson, they found Russell Wilson in the 3rd round. And fortunately they did because they were able to be a perennial playoff contender. So the Raiders don't have a top pick to get one of the top 2 guys unless they trade up. Now, there are some reports out there, Daniel Jeremiah saying possibly that Shedeur Sanders could fall to Raiders at 6. I still don't see that happening. But this is where your scouting department comes into play. And I bring up John Spytek in this conversation. John Spytek has talked about being on the same page when he was in Tampa Bay. Because remember, Tampa Bay had two assistant general managers. Mike Greenberg was the other guy, helping Jason Light out. So I think having Pete Carroll in there with personnel experience, bringing in Spytek, Tom Brady being involved in the quarterback situation, they're all going to have to put their heads together and be able to come together on the same page on what they want their quarterback room to look like. And once they do that, they can possibly come up with a guy who you can develop within 1 or 2 years behind whoever you sign as a veteran. If they do, that person could become a starter in 2026, 2027.
All right, there you go. Appreciate the call. Now we're off to Pete and W up in Portland.
Hey, Mo and Scott, PNW up here in Portland, Oregon. Hope you guys are doing well. Hopefully you guys take my call. Before I start, I just want to give 2 shout-outs to a couple of callers, actually. There was a lady that called in. I think her name was Michelle from the East Bay. Just want to give kudos. Love it. Love the female voices. I know there's a lot of them in Raider Nation. Scott, you'll know this. You should do an honor for Lee Hacksaw Hamilton and open up a ladies' line. You should do that, Scott. Hacksaw was a legend for a lot of reasons, so that's something. And the other one's MDS. You know, when either I can't call or my call isn't selected, I can always rely on MDS. Has great takes, and a lot of times like he's reading my mind. So really appreciate those two. Okay. I did have a thing to kind of get your take on. Really happy with Pete Carroll, Spytek. Just really optimistic. There's 2 things I had a question on. One is a trade. I'm kind of with MDS. I think the time to trade Max is now because you're going to get a ton of value. I know you need a rush defender to be a contender, but I got to be honest, the Raiders are a couple of years out from that. I think success for this first year is going to be 7 to 8 wins, just being realistically, splitting with Denver and the Chargers, and keep playing Kansas City tough. That's just my take. And you get a lot of value. If not Max, then for sure I think Colton Miller. I think he has some value, not as much as Max, and moving on from him might just be the time. That's an unpopular take, but I'll live with it. The other one is Shedeur Sanders. I think there's a world where Las Vegas can sit there and Shedeur might fall. I can see a fall both from kind of a skill set level where people, as scouts, might be rating him, and also the Dion factor. I think Dion's going to be doing a lot of moves behind the scenes to try to make it as unenticing for teams to draft him that aren't a destination he'd like for them to go. I just can't see Tennessee drafting Cam Ward behind Shedeur. I think if they draft the quarterback, it's going to be Cam Ward. And I like Cam Ward a little bit more than Shedeur, so I don't think he's going to be there at 6 for sure. So just something to keep an eye on. Would love your opinion. Thanks for doing all you do. Mo, you sounded a little sick. Hopefully your runny nose is doing all right. You kind of reminded me of Roscoe from, remember that show with Martin? You might be a little too young, but you reminded me of Roscoe a little bit. That's all I had in my mind. So Google it if you don't know.
There you go. PNW up in Portland. Mo, I understand what people are saying about Max Crosby, but when you and I have been very religious about talking, when you build a championship team in the NFL, it starts in the trenches. So with PNW, and I disagree with them. I think, look, you're not going to trade the identity of your team, which right now is Max Crosby, because you don't have that identity at quarterback. If you had some big franchise quarterback, then it's a little bit different story. So there, and then Colton Miller, I understand, Colton Miller came back from an injury last year, had an up and down year at times this year, but I just don't think you trade those kind of pieces, especially when you're trying to improve that offensive line. Now, if you had some depth there and had young talent that was ready to go, okay, but I don't get that at all. I think both those guys need to stay in the silver and black.
So I'm not that young, by the way, PNW. I do remember. But I'll say this about Max Crosby because MDM and I had a good conversation on the X about this. right? And I'll further the conversation and I'll say that if you're the Raiders, right, if you're Pete Carroll, if you were even thinking about trading Max Crosby, the wrong thing to do is to go to a press conference and mention him by name multiple times. As I said, Spytek within the first, 3 minutes of him talking mentions Max Crosby. Pete Carroll directly talked to Max Crosby. And not to say that things don't change after a press conference. It's a press conference. You're trying to rile up the fan base. I get all of that. But even if there was even an idea that you were going to trade him from the onset, you wouldn't mention him by name. At least I would think you wouldn't call him out at the press conference as many times as they did. But I get the idea of trade a player before he loses max value, trade him at his peak so that you can get the maximum return. I get that. I just don't see them trading Max Crosby. As you said, heart and soul of their football team right now. And I remember, and Khalil Mack was a different type of leader. Maybe he wasn't a vocal leader like Max Crosby is. But I go back to 2018 when John Gruden and Reggie McKenzie traded Khalil Mack to the Bears. I remember the effect it had on the players. While they didn't say it at the time of the trade, Bruce Irvin came out and said it deflated the locker room. And Khalil Mack wasn't even a vocal leader, and it deflated that locker room. Can you imagine if they traded Max Crosby, before the season, in the offseason, what it would do to that locker room? So I would just be careful with trading a player of his caliber, and especially with his stature being a leader on that football team, not just the defense, but the entire team. So I would just keep that in mind. Again, I did mention that Daniel Jeremiah is with you, PNW, that he thinks that Shedeur Sanders could be there at 6, and maybe he's hearing some rumblings behind the scenes that Dion may be doing some maneuvering behind the scenes, that he doesn't want his kid going to the Browns or going to the Titans. Maybe the Giants don't want to bring in a Shedeur Sanders, Deion Sanders partnership. It's possible. I just see that if one of those teams don't want him, I think another team could trade up to get him.
Yeah, and again, too, I think that you look at this situation with Max Crosby, and I understand the idea of value, but that's perceived value. Okay, he's at his highest value, so you trade him. What are you getting in return? You don't know. It's a complete crapshoot. You know what you have with Max Crosby. And to your point, also, PNW, yes, the Raiders may win 7, 8 games next year, but I could also see them turning it around and winning 5 more games. Like that's not impossible. You saw, now of course they had the quarterback in Washington, but you saw what happened in Washington this year. So I think the Raiders, this is not, you don't have to rebuild a team and it takes 5, 6 years. You can have an in-between year, this next coming year, where you start to work on things. And by year 2, so Max Crosby's got a lot left in the tank. To have that elite pass rusher, top of the league guy there, you need that guy. So why, if you were 0-17 and you had no talent on your roster and you were turning everything over and you had a young coach, never done, okay, then I can start to see, yeah, you're a ways away. You're way off here. But I don't think the Raiders are there. I don't think, yes, they were not a good team, but I also don't think that they're so brutal that it's going to take 5 or 6 years, and by the time Max Crosby's ready to compete, he's ready to retire. I don't think that, so that's why I agree with that assessment on keeping him. All right, now we're going to go on to, got a couple more calls here. Raider Easy, here he is.
Fellas, Scott, Mo, welcome to the Pete Carroll era. Yeah.
Carroll era.
Trust me, that's the last time you ever hear me say his name like that. But anyway, this Raider Easy from the Bay, and I just wanted to share a couple thoughts about this whole situation. And I think you can summarize it with one line, which is sometimes in life, you don't get what you want, but you get what you need. And that's kind of what I want to share with Raider Nation when it comes to the whole Pete Carroll hire. Because I'm like a lot of you guys where I really wanted the young, hotshot offensive coordinator to come and lead the way and help light up the scoreboard. And while I really wanted that, the truth, if we're being honest with ourselves about this team, is that the team's just not ready for that yet. It's just not built for it yet. What do I mean? I think when you bring in these young head coaches or new head coaches, they need a really strong foundation to support them. And the Raiders at this moment, they're just not built like that. I think they're trying to get there, you know, they broke ground, they've dug a big hole in the ground, but, you know, they haven't really built a strong enough foundation to support a young head coach, and there's just a lot of cracks that they could fall through. They're getting there. I mean, what we're seeing now is we're starting to see Tom Brady become the architect behind this whole thing, and Pete Carroll is the guy that can do this for him. He's the Bob the Builder. He's the guy that can build this. He's the guy that can set up the foundation for the next head coach to hopefully take over. Because he's got the all-around skills. People talk about him as a defensive-minded coach, but let's be real. Pete knows all sides of football, both on and off the field. I mean, he's got not just all phases of the game on the field, but he knows how to deal with the front office. He's got the business savvy and the political savvy to maneuver. And he's a big culture builder. I mean, just look what he did in L.A. and Seattle. I mean, by the way, if you've got some time, look what he did for a Better L.A. Foundation and a Better Seattle Foundation if you really want to talk about culture building. But I think he's the right man for the job. Now, is there enough to be excited about when it comes to his coordinator picks? We'll see. But for right now, the AFC West is going to officially be must-see TV with these 4 head coaches lined up to play. So that's what I got. We'll see what happens next. Raider Easy. I'm out.
All right, there you go. Raider Easy. Good point. That AFC West, man, I'll tell you. And it's interesting. The reaction, Mo, to this hire has been overwhelmingly positive. For Raider Nation, who seems to be very in tune with what the national media thinks of its team, it's been universally praised for this, and that partially is due, I think, to the Tom Brady involvement and people crediting Tom Brady for understanding what the Raiders need. Also, the Raiders just incredibly bad record of hiring coaches and firing coaches and all that kind of stuff. People like the Pete Carroll hire. We also saw reports that some NFL inside folks, from front office folks, are not as excited about that, and I don't know where that comes from, but it is interesting. I've seen a lot of people call this hire the best hire of the offseason.
I probably wouldn't go that far, but I do think it was a quality hire. And I think, and I was in this camp too. I think you wanted to find the next D'Amico Ryans, the next Sean McVay, the next Kevin O'Connell, because you figure that head coach is going to be around for quite some time. And if it's an offensive-minded head coach, that he's going to be able to call plays, so you don't have to replace your offensive coordinator. I think that was the ideal situation. You're looking for the ideal situation. But when it came down to their interview list, and I'm going to say this again, Scott and Raider Easy, I don't think young hotshot offensive coordinators were interested in the Raiders' job. Again, look at their interview list. Todd Monken was the only guy that they tried to request an interview with, and he never got back to them. I think a lot of offensive-minded head coaches said, hey, look, Tom Brady, I respect you, but I'm not interested. Ben Johnson was the only guy that actually took the Zoom meeting, but ultimately he went with the Bears, and reports came out after that the Raiders were never the front runners to get Ben Johnson. So I think when you look at the reality of the Raiders situation, as Raider Easy did, Pete Carroll was the best option.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. All right, we're going to get to our last call here. We couldn't get to all of them again, guys. We will get to calls, but I just want to make sure we get all these in. Here's our buddy, South Florida Raider.
Hey, what's up, fellas? This is South Florida Raider. Just want to say that I love this hire of Spytek and Carroll, especially Spytek. From everything I've read, this guy is deeply rooted. I think he's going to be very resourceful for the franchise. I think that's where he will be a step up from Telesco. I think he brings the whole package: free agency, coaches, draft picks. I think he knows the game very well. The other thing I want to say is that he's also a Wolverine, and now the Raiders front office is run by Wolverines, which is awesome because I'm a Wolverine on Saturdays and a Raider on Sundays. Now, I don't know how Scott's going to feel about that. I know he likes the Irish, but I think the Wolverines are going to take us over the top. The other thing is that's the way I look at Brady, man. I look at him as a Wolverine. I don't look at him as a Patriot. I'm Darkman X I'm Darkman 305 on X. Look for it later, guys.
All right, there you go, South Florida Raider. And yeah, look, Spytek, and it was interesting too. He mentioned Tom Telesco there because we don't have, there hasn't been a lot of reporting and kind of any sort of decompress on what happened with Telesco. Why did they decide to move on, right? I mean, we know Brady was there, probably wanted to have input there. But Mark Davis, after the press conference the other day, said something a little bit telling, Mo, and he said, hey, we like John Spytek because being the general manager just isn't about constructing the roster. There's so many other things involved. And he mentioned relationships and things like that. So I think maybe we get a little bit of Tom Brady and Mark Davis looking at Tom Telesco and saying, he's just not the guy, which makes sense. And certainly Spytek's strengths are exactly what the Raiders need at this point.
First of all, shout out to South Florida Raider. Darkman 305, I remember that name being in my Bleach Report chat. So correct me if I'm wrong, Darkman 305, aka South Florida Raider. You were in the Bleach Report live this past week or this week. So appreciate you for joining me. What I'll say about Spytek is when he was in Tampa Bay, it was said that he was also involved with the contracts. And now, we know the Raiders have had, Tom Delaney involved in that regard. But I think Spytek's involvement in different things, free agency, contracts, draft, I think gives you a well-rounded GM where he's not just specialized in one lane or one thing. I think that's going to help, again, with Pete Carroll also being involved in personnel in Seattle. I think it'll help John Spytek, along with his inexperience, being the guy. As when I say the guy, I mean the lead GM, right? Because he was an assistant in Tampa Bay. So a lot of people say, well, how do we know what was John Spytek's handling? How do we know where his input was? But again, I highlight that. Go back to listen to some of these podcasts here talking about what John Spytek meant for Jason Light, the GM of the Buccaneers, and you'll see that he had his hand in a lot of things. And Pete Carroll's experience will definitely help him fill in any blind spots that he has.
Right, and he also learned, I mentioned, I think last week, that he ran those Tuesday meetings when Tom Brady was there with the quarterback to go over game planning. So this is a guy who understands the game. He understands the quarterback's needs. He learned from Tom Brady. They learned from each other, which is why I think Brady went after him. There's a level of trust there. He understands, he gets the process and the system. And so to me, that is so vital and so very important. Now, these guys got to put it together and do it. It's great. Everybody feels great about everything right now, but now comes the hard work, the scouting, getting the players on the roster, getting the right free agents in, finding those coaching staff, filling out that coaching staff, and we'll be talking about that over the next week or so. All right, well, that's going to wrap up the show. If we didn't get to your call, I'm sorry. Listen, don't take it personal. Call back in. If you got a call on this time, I'll probably defer you next time so we can get more people on. But keep calling in. 702-900-7869 is the number for the Raider Nation Mailbag. Mo, I know you're done with shows for the week, but you'll be back on Monday with your Bleacher Report live at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. What's coming up on the written side for Mr. Moten?
So the written side over at Sportsnet, I'll talk about some of the Senior Bowl standouts that the Raiders may be interested in. As you know, the Senior Bowl practices are this week. The game is on Saturday. I'll kind of review and wrap up what came out of Mobile, Alabama, and talk about who may be moving up the draft boards and who the Raiders may be interested in. If your call, by the way, didn't get in here at Silver and Black today, jump on the Bleacher Report live chat with me. Maybe I'll catch it on the chat and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Because a lot of times I like to leave the floor open for the last 10 to 15 minutes for what people want to say or what they want to talk about at the end of those lives.
Yeah, we'll get past the Super Bowl, and then we're going to try to put together a caller roundtable. So we're going to get people here on video, some of the callers. I mean, we can't get everybody because we'd have like 40 people, and it would be a cluster. But we'll get some folks together. We might do that a couple times this offseason, so we'll do that as well. So stay tuned for that, too. By the way, in the description, if you're watching us on video or even in the podcast, if you're watching us, listening to us, there is links to Mo's latest work on both Sportsnaut and Bleacher Report. Also a link to my work up on Sportsnaut. I did a mock draft, a 3-round top 3 pick, actually, because somebody pointed out to me that, well, they have 2 3-round picks because the Jets trade. Yes, I just went through the 3 top picks, so you can check that out up on Sportsnaut as well. We will be back next Thursday. Do us a favor, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio. Don't forget to rate and review. Also, if you're watching us on video, make sure you subscribe, hit that notifications bell, and be sure to tune in. That way you know every time we have a new show or we go live, whatever may be going on, you'll be the first to know. Also want to give a shout out again to our thanks to our friends at BetUS for bringing you the video here. Make sure you get that 150% sign-up bonus up to $2,000 using the promo code YouTube150. Mo, I will see you next week, my man.
Take care, Scott. Take care, Raider Nation.
All right. For our producer, Mike Robier, former Moat, and I'm Scott Branson. This has been Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey Sports original podcast. We will see you all next week.